Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I'm your host, Scott Kumler, team leader, coach, and someone who's obsessed with helping real estate agents build a business and a life they're actually excited about. And today's episode, this one means a lot to me personally. I'm sitting down with someone who has not only shaped my business, but who shaped the careers of thousands of agents across the country. He's one of the top real estate coaches in the industry, a massive producer, and my personal mentor, Joshua Smith. If you don't know Joshua's story, here's the quick version. He sold 48 homes in his very first year in real estate. He became one of the top foreclosure agents in the nation during the market crash, dominating a space most agents ran away from. And throughout his career, he has sold over 7,000 homes. That's not a typo, 7,000. But what makes Joshua different isn't just the production. It's his mindset, his systems, and his insanely high level of accountability. He coaches from experience, he trains from the battlefield, and the strategies he teaches actually work in today's market. In this episode, we dig into his exact habits and routines from day one, how he scaled through the foreclosure crisis when most agents struggle to survive, what agents must be doing right now to win in this market, and how he built a business that continues to grow year after year. If you're an agent who's ready to level up, get serious, and start operating like a true professional, this is the episode you don't skip. And as always, if this conversation lights a fire in you and you want to explore partnership opportunity with me and my organization, feel free to call or text me at 623-387-2688 or book a Zoom call with my calendar link below. Hit the like button, subscribe, and let's dive into the most powerful conversations you're going to hear all year. Here's my interview with Joshua Smith. All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. Super excited to have a very special guest, a huge mentor of mine ever since I first got into real estate, the one and only Joshua Smith. Josh, appreciate hopping on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. An honor to be here with you, brother.
Awesome, man. Well, as always, and obviously you're a big presence out in the social world, and you have your own podcast and stuff like that. So probably a lot of people have heard your journey before, but just in case, someone's listening to my podcast the first time today and they don't know who Joshua Smith is, kind of give everyone your brief background of what actually got you into real estate. You've obviously been in real estate for a long time. What got you into real estate at the beginning of your journey?
Yeah, dude. So, I was in the health club business before I got into real estate. My dad owned gyms for like 30 years. I always thought that that's what I was going to do. And then my dad ended up selling his gyms and kind of, retiring, semi-retiring as soon as I graduated high school. But I stayed in that field. But at the age of 23, I quickly realized that, hey, man, unless I get into ownership, there's no way I'm going to be able to make enough money to be able to support a future family. And so at first I started looking at like, how do I go open up a gym? But dude, as a college dropout, had about $1,000 to my name, 23 years old, it was going to cost 800 grand to open up my own facility. Nobody was going to give me a loan. So then I started looking at, okay, like how could I go out there and just raise some capital? And this was 2005. Markets just booming. 2005, for those that weren't familiar with that market that are watching and listening to this, that was very similar to like 2021. Just things were, it was just nuts, right? So the perception at least was, okay, everybody in real estate's killing it. So I was like, okay, I didn't want to have to go back to college. I was just looking for something I could jump into, low barrier to entry that I could afford to get into. And look, I've always been a hard worker. I love people. I love sales. So I was confident I could do well. So I got licensed, but my goal was, dude, just to go out there and do this for 4 or 5 years, save up the money that I needed to save to then go open up, my own health club. So this wasn't, 21 years later, here I am, but it wasn't meant to be a forever thing. But I always say that, like, once I got involved, health and fitness is a passion, but real estate very quickly became my obsession. So jumped in 2005, dude, and just hit the ground running.
Nice. So take me back to like kind of the early days obviously you went from like being a solo agent to, being a team leader and top producing team leader, but just guide me through the early days. So like as a brand new agent, fresh out of school, there's so many different lead generation activities available out there. Like what were those early days like? What made you decide to lead generate the way you did lead generate? And how did you get business kind of in those beginning early days?
Yeah. So I was looking at this now, dude, 2005. There was no social media. There was no YouTube. Like our menu of options was much smaller. It was like you had open houses, cold calling, door knocking, networking, and that was about it. But I just started assessing, okay, like what are my skill sets? What am I good at? And again, doing health club sales started in health club sales, working with my dad at 14. So I had 9 years of sales experience in that industry. So I just started like looking at the correlations, right? So like, well, I don't need to necessarily reinvent myself. How can I take skill sets I learned over here and apply them over here? And I looked at open houses. I was like, dude, this is the same exact thing, right? Like when people enter a health club facility, they stop at the front desk, fill out a guest registry, and get introduced to the sales guy. Yeah, right. Then my job was to develop rapport, develop a connection with them, identify where they're at with their, health journey, where their goals are, and then articulate that we have the best facility to get them from where are at to where they want to go with their health and fitness goals. So if you nailed the connection piece and then you articulated that value, then boom, it'd lead into a health club membership sale. So I'm like, dude, open houses, same damn thing, other than selling them a membership and then upsell them to a personal training package. I'm like, I just got to sell them on me as my realtor. So I knew right out of the gate that open houses were going to be my thing. Now I quickly realized when I was in school, and I think this is one of my differences versus others, is I quickly realized that man, they're not teaching me anything about how to go out there and make money in this business. And again, with the sales background, like I knew it was all about like, dude, I need leads, I need conversations, I need to so I started interviewing every top realtor I possibly could, doing, reading every book, doing a ton of due diligence before I got licensed. So I had my game plan together. So the day that I got licensed, I was able to hit the ground running. So I did, my first client, I got my fourth day in the business. Now, some people are like, oh, you got lucky. I'm like, okay, we can say that. But I also did 4 open houses. I was doing open houses every single day, but just cranking open houses. That led to 48 deals my first year. And in context is important. Look, I was 23 years old. I wasn't married, didn't have kids. I could work 7 days a week, work 80 hours a week, and I did. You know, um, uh, that time in my life, I could get away with that, right? So I think that's important. So somebody isn't comparing themselves to what their first was like with mine because we all have different circumstances. But then from there, as I started winding down my second, my first year, I just started looking at like, okay, like doing a SWOT analysis. Like what are the threats in my business? What are the vulnerabilities? And I was like, well, man, dude, because I didn't take a listing for like my whole first year in the business. So I was spending like 10 to 15 hours a week just begging other realtors to constantly do their open houses so I could have enough storefronts to host my open houses. So I'm like, okay, that's a vulnerability. That's a threat. Like I need to get 20 of my own listings at any given time. And like, I didn't even care about selling the listings. Like, yes, I wanted to sell them to help my clients accomplish their goals. But for me, I was doing so well with open house. Like it wasn't about the income play there for me. It was just making sure that I removed that vulnerability. So there was no bottlenecks in my ability to open houses. So then I started adding expireds. That led me to 103 deals, year two. The other thing that I did though, from first year to second year is, I wanted to double going into my second year, but I just started assessing this like, dude, there's not enough hours in a day. I'm already, at the office every morning at 5 a.m., usually into my work day at, 9, 10 o'clock at night. Like there's not enough hours in a day, so then I brought on Ashley, as my first assistant I ever hired. She came on to take all the essential non-money making activities off my plate, so I was able to allocate all of my time onto money making activities, and that's what brought me to 103 deals the second year. Then going to my third year, or round out my second year, got to the point where I was like 2 to 3 weeks booked out from going on a buyer consultation or listing presentation. Well, nobody's going to wait 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 weeks. They might wait 2 or 3 days. So I realized, okay, I'm just pissing away money here. So then I started bringing on agents. And at that time, teams weren't really a thing. So, and again, there's no podcasts, right? So now, luckily though, I had sales team building experience in the health clubs, so I just took the knowledge I had from that, applied it over here. But then that allowed just over 300 units the third year, and just kept growing and scaling from there.
Nice. And now I do want to get into because obviously you got into real estate right before the great housing market crash, in 2008, 2010 timeframe. And so, but then with that being said, what most happened during that time is most agents ended up getting out of the business and ended up and I think that's good correlation to today because obviously right now today, and it's obviously not as bad as it was during that period, but obviously there is a transaction volume decrease in the last few years. And so there are a lot of agents that are getting out of this industry right now. But during that time, instead of getting out of the industry, you ended up taking off even more and ended up. So kind of take me through that a little bit. So like what? So obviously you became a huge I know you started off short sales, then went into kind of foreclosures, and then you kind of had all these businesses. But what made you decide to kind of get into that in the first place? What were some of the signs you saw during that period that made you decide to transition your business?
Yeah, so at a very high level, and I think this is really important for anybody watching or listening to understand and know is that look, the transactions are always taking place. Real estate's always selling. Um, as a real estate professional, if you get damn good at learning how to acquire and service traditional buyers and sellers, then get damn good at learning how to acquire and service investors, then get damn good at learning how to acquire and service distressed properties. Like no matter what's going on, one of those is always going to be strong. So for me, I've always looked at this as, dude, my job is to move the real estate product. Like I know my local market, and know the real estate, right? But who's buying, who's selling, why they're buying, why they're selling, where they're coming from, where they're going from, will change throughout our careers. So I've, just always been, laser focused on knowing my market, studying my market, making those pivots. And that's how my business has been able to grow for 20 years straight with never having a down year. Um, because we're going to and pivoting with the opportunities where they're at. Right. So at that point in time, short sales. Now I didn't know what a short sale was. Yeah, right. Initially. Because you got to remember, I jumped in at 23 years old, like very little life experience, very little real estate experience. But the kind of the blessing too was, dude, is because I didn't know that much, right? I was just a hard worker and just worked my ass off for my clients and just led to sales. Um, is like every day I was having to pull out the blank sheet of paper and reinvent myself daily. So I didn't have bad habits yet. I wasn't stuck. I wasn't like, oh, this is how I grow my business. Let's just say, I'll do whatever it takes to get business. I just want more business, right? Short sales was on accident, dude. I had my first listing, not my first listing, but the first listing that was a short sale. You talk with my sellers, okay, what's your mortgage payoff? Get it ordered, right? So we know what that is. We're doing the HUD. They're supposed to walk away with like 40 grand. So, like 3 days before the closing, I had a call from the title company. And they're like, well, when's the seller planning on bringing in their funds to close? I'm like, what are you talking about? They should be getting a check. They shouldn't be bringing in a check. And they're like, no, they took out a line of credit on the property and they owe X amount of dollars. So I go to my seller. I'm like, hey guys, like you didn't tell me about this. I told you to provide me all the, whatever. Now knowing what I know now, yeah, would have had title run that way earlier on, right? Even before listing, right? But I didn't know what I didn't know, So anyway, though, I go to my seller though. I'm like, what's up, dude? You guys didn't disclose this to me. And they're like, well, they knew they took out the line of credit. They just didn't know it was attached to the house.
Mm.
Right. So then it was like, okay, well, what do we do? Well, the only option we had left, because they couldn't afford to keep the home anymore, they had to move, was to do a short sale. Right. So I kind of stumbled into those. Then initially, right, all my short sales were coming from expires. Because what I started to discover was, okay, it wasn't that they were expiring because they weren't willing to lower the price. It was because they couldn't lower the price because the more, and just like we're seeing right now, right? Like anybody that bought, kind of 2020 and beyond right now, they're pretty much underwater for the most part, right? At least in our market. So started running into a ton of that. So I had to get really versed on those. So, into 2006, leading into 2027, started pivoting a lot into short sales. But then one thing I've always done is like having a lot of conversations with my title company reps, right? Just seeing because they see so much more volume than we do.
Mm.
So I'm always asking, okay, like, what are you seeing? Like, what's the sales makeup? What are you seeing? What are you seeing more of? Who's buying? Who's selling? Right. And again, I didn't know what REO was, right? But they're like, oh, we're seeing a lot of REO. What's that? Well, it's bank-owned foreclosures. Right. Like I just need them to point. I got Google. I can figure out the rest. But then you could see that traditional business was becoming less and less. Right. Short sales were growing. REOs were starting to pop. So then I spent about 6 months just prospecting like crazy to get my first REO account. But then that built up to the peak at about 35 different banks, outsourcers, asset managers that we worked for. And it was crazy because I went from like having 50 listings at any given time to like 400, plus,
Mm.
so I had to get really damn good at systems and processes. And because, prices, we got to the point where, like, dude, we were selling, $30,000 homes in Maryville and, right, whatever. So, and the banks weren't paying full commissions, all that was predetermined. So it was like, dude, like you had to learn the volume game there. But it was very lucrative, but then, and again, I'm just reading the market, right? So traditional business is declining. We're seeing these come up. So I'm still focused on traditional business, but it's like, okay, I know that if this is starting to decline, if I don't pivot strategies and who my ideal client is a target, like eventually I'm going to run out of business, right? So I'm still, doing those things, but then I'm learning, mastering short sales, learning, mastering REO, building those up. Well, then in about 2012, we started seeing, okay, traditional business wasn't picking up at all yet, at least in our market, but you had short sales and REO starting to come down. So then again, I'm like, okay, like, dude, if I don't figure this out, again, they're going to run out of business. Where's the next opportunity at? So then we started seeing for the first time hedge funds, big, private equity firms, hedge funds coming in buying. Historically, hedge funds, private equity firms have bought commercial, bought multifamily, but weren't buying residential. Well, in about 2012 in our market, we just started seeing them come in and start acquiring more and more and more property, so then, okay, how do I get in with them? Yeah, right. So then I just went back to prospecting mode, did everything I possibly could to, structure myself and position myself to get in with, hedge funds, private equity. Then I got to the point where we're popping 50 deals a month, with that type, so we're still doing short sales, still doing REO, but they're coming down. This is growing. Traditional business was down. And then about 2013, the kind of hedge fund private equity was like a good 18-month run, but then they were kind of in and out, right? But then by that time, okay, traditional business started kicking up, so started repivoting, back to that very heavily. And that's the same thing now. I mean, you and I were working together back in, 2022 when it's like, okay, guys, here's what we're seeing with the interest rates. Here's the quantitative tightening process the Federal Reserve is, doing. This is what this means. This is how we got to adjust. This is what we got to pay attention to, right? So you just, like, if you're always, if you're a student of the game and student of your market, like, you see those opportunities, but you got to make sure to pivot. The vast majority, they're getting just freaking kicked in the teeth right now, dude, is they're still doing the same shit they did 5 years ago. Well, the shit you did 5 years ago doesn't, I mean, for some it might work, but for the vast majority, it's not working. Like, you got to make sure you're pivoting.
Yeah, I love that because I mean so many people, so many agents are getting out of the market right now, even compared to where, was back obviously when the market crashed before, but like I know we've talked about this before, the market's always good for someone, and there's always transactions taking place. I think right now in Phoenix area, still 6,000 to 7,000 home sales every single month, which is still a decent amount, of sales, but obviously things just are not as easy as they once were during COVID, when everyone was buying a house and interest rates were super low and stuff like that. So take me through, because obviously you've always done a very good job reading the market, what's going on. Obviously that's one of the reasons you're able to pivot so well back when the market crashed in the 2010 timeframe. So kind of take us through a little bit what you're seeing going on in the market right now, especially with transaction volume down. What are some things that you see taking place? And then what are some things that you also feel that agents should transition to as well or go after when it comes to today's market?
Yeah. So the first thing, let's talk about, what you alluded to earlier, which is the transaction volume decline. I mean, this is the toughest market that we've seen in 40 years from a transaction volume, decline. Like, we haven't seen this low of transaction volume since 1995. But then in 1995, you had a third of the amount of realtors and you had about 65 million lesser Americans. So if you look at this, per capita, way, like, this is the worst, most challenging housing market that we've ever seen from a transaction perspective ever in recorded history of real estate. So okay, we got to first make that pivot. Yeah, right. So then from there, you have really two options. When you got 42% less, and well, I'm speaking this in kind of nationwide terms because everybody's specific city is going to have different stats. So if we look at nationally, transaction volume declines about 42% from the previous, decade norm. So okay, if I got 42% lesser people that are willing or able to purchase and transact in real estate, okay, I can either do 42% more lead gen, 42% more lead follow for the same result, right? So that, essentially just go double to get the same result, double the amount of hours, double the amount of efforts, and that works for some, and you can go that path. Or you can play what I call strategic offense, right? So by strategic, I mean, because this is a market now and has been for several years now, of targeting those. It's not those that want to buy and sell. It's going after those that need to buy and sell.
Mhm.
Right. So, because I talk to so many realtors right now, they're like, oh, dude, I'm doing all this lead gen, lead fault, but a bunch of tire kickers, like, nobody's motivated. I'm like, dude, you're targeting the wrong people.
Mhm.
Like, who has the highest probability of needing your services? They need to buy and sell. So how do we do that? Okay, let's just look at, okay, why do people buy and sell real estate? Okay, they get married, yeah, right, buy their first home, they have a couple kids, they outgrow that home, maybe buy their next home, and they have a couple more kids, they're in peak income earning years, they buy the last that move up by their lifetime. Then their kids move out, they're empty nesters, they downsize, and then that house until they can no longer take care of themselves or take care of the house, then they move to a family or assisted living. And then you got detours, divorce, bankruptcy, death via probate. You've got all these detours that can take relocation, right? So the more that we can capture them when they're in the middle of that life event change, that's going to create that urgency where they need to buy and sell. So we're getting much more strategic and have over the last few years. So let's just say, okay, like before, let's just say you were some of the circle prospecting, whether it be geo farming or picking up the phone and geo calling, through circle prospecting. It's like, okay, in this market, I'm not going to do that, right? That's shotgunning shit out, right? I want to be very laser focused, very strategic. With this stuff. So I'm targeting, okay, like example, like probates. We know that 70% of families that inherit a home, an estate from a death in the family, end up selling those properties. Yeah, right. Or people going through divorce, right? The average divorce takes about 90 to 120 days, to finalize. Probably them needing to sell as they go through this new life change, very high. People at 30 days plus late in their mortgage, right? So just really looking at, okay, like where do they have that highest need? So that's where we're talking about right now. Like you got to play strategic offense. So strategic, which we just talked about, like getting very laser focused, really niching down who has the highest probability of needing our services. By offense, I mean like making sure that your fate is in your own control. Like I'm not going to wait for anything to come to me in this market. Like I'm going after it, right? And then from there, when we look at this, okay, prepping for what's coming. Now I don't have a crystal ball, so I'm just going to share my personal thoughts. Could be wrong, could be, right? But I've found it's served me extremely well my whole entire career of hope for the best, plan for the worst. If I prepared correctly and worst case happens, okay, I'm good. If it doesn't happen, I'm good. So it's the best way to hedge in our businesses for whatever's to come. But I'm convinced that this is going to be worse than the great financial crisis of what we're stepping into, possibly worse than the Great Depression. We're in the biggest everything bubble that we've ever seen. Stock market, real estate, like the real estate bubble right now is so massive. But the everything bubble, right? Whether the bond market, debt, stock market, like, but then when you also look at the amount of debt, let's just look at the consumer. So I spent a lot of time studying the consumer. At no point in time in recorded history, we've seen the consumer, and we'll just talk about the United States, here in the US, have the debt to savings gap be this wide or accelerate at this pace. So it's the most unaffordable time to be alive as a U.S. citizen, recorded history, and it is the worst off the consumer is, right? Like they've never been in this bad of a position. So the average consumer is a way worse off position than leading into 2008, and a way worse off position than leading into the Great Depression. I just saw a stat this morning that the poverty line for a family of four in the United States right now is 140 grand
Hmm.
in annual income.
Wow.
Like I don't know about like you. I mean, you and I are. Yeah, I think you're a little bit younger than me, but we're close enough to the same age. Like when we were kids growing up, it was like, oh, if I could make 100 grand a year.
Yeah.
Right now, 140 grand a year national average with a family of four. You now are on the poverty line if you're making that or under. It's just freaking insane. Right? So, but then when we look at, there's other factors with this. Like the Great Financial Crisis was a U.S. issue that bled over to the rest of the globe that the rest of the globe felt. Now the whole entire globe, every country's in a massive, massive issues. So if we weren't monetizing the debt like we have been over the last 17 years, just essentially printing money to monetize the debt, we'd be in a 17-year long depression right now. So they've been kicking the can down the road. I think that there's no more road left.
Mm.
Yeah, right. So I see this imploding massively. Now they'll try to do everything. The powers that be try to do everything they can to solve this, save this. I just don't think they're going to be able to. And if you look at this, Fannie Mae just recently came out, so there's got to be three things to happen to get back to 2019 affordability in the real estate space. So number one, price or incomes must increase by 60% with no other inflation taking place. Okay, what's the probability of that happening? Zero, right? Other inflation, like when you have a government that prints $8 trillion every 100 days, that alone is 8% year over year inflationary, not counting CPI. So whatever you see with that CPI number, if you want to believe it, I think it's all bullshit. I think it's probably double or triple what that number is. Yeah, right. So okay, life is at least 10% more expensive every single year. So inflation is inevitable. At least until we go into massively deflationary recession or depression. So okay, that has to happen. Or number two, mortgage rates need to come down to 2.25%. Okay, it happened one time.
Mm.
It's unconstitutional what they did, but the Federal Reserve came in, bought $90 billion a month of mortgage-backed securities for almost 2 years straight. Never done that before. Their excuse was this 100-year pandemic. Probably that happening is probably, again, very, very low. Unless World War III kicks off, maybe, I don't know. Right? But then the third element then is on a national level, prices need to come down from today, not from where they were at peak. From today, 38%. So if I look at those, okay, the highest probability is probably prices are going to come down 38%. So yeah, we're and there's so many other things going on, like supply and demand. People talk about that. It's like, dude, like human beings actually qualify for the endangered species list now. Like population is shrinking globally at such a rapid rate. And I talk to my kids about this all the time. I'm like, dude, like in your guys' lifetime, you'll probably see half the population on the globe than you see today. It's going to be trippy. Replacement rate in the United States is 2.2 kids per couple. Right now, like 1.87, and we're one of the most healthy demographies in the world, and we're in trouble. I mean, I could just go on and on and on with this, but dude, it's my best guess is shit's going to get very ugly. That's not to scare anybody. Dude, there's always going to be massive opportunity, dude. There's always people buying and selling. You just got to read the markets, pivot accordingly, and you'll be good.
Yeah, I love what you said because it's always important, I think, to control what you can control and not necessarily worry. I mean, it's important to like take notice of what's going on, but sometimes if you get caught up too much on what's going on in the outside world, you end up like losing focus and stop controlling. You start pointing fingers, saying, "Well, this is the reason why I'm not successful," or whatever. But as long as you control what you can control and do the things you can do every single day, I think that's extremely important. So, take me. I know we talked a little bit about like lead generation, but if you were a brand new agent, let's say there's a brand new agent like watching this podcast right now and they're like, what would like for you, and you're very systematic when it comes to this. Like, if you were to pick like two or three lead sources or lead generation sources and create like a perfect schedule every single week, because I think one of the things that's really hard for most real estate agents when they first get into real estate is being their own boss and being consistent with whatever activity it is that they need you to do. So, if you were a brand new agent today, and there's a brand new agent watching this podcast, and they're like, "What should I do every single day?" What would be your like perfect schedule to go out there and get business?
Yeah. So knowing what I know now, if I had to start over or move to a new city, lost everything, move to a new city, had to start with zero again, like what would I do? Right. So, and again, when I say these things, look, there's 1,000 ways to create success in this industry. So I'm not telling everybody to do this. This is just what I would do. Yeah. Right. So I'd look at, okay, I have one strategy for my now immediate business. You know, um, which is going to be prospecting based. So for me, that's going to be open houses, right? And when I say one, I'd actually pick two. And this is the second one is to fuel the number one, and I'll unpack what I mean by this here in a minute. But then also, this is going to be the biggest listing opportunity of the next several decades. So for my immediate sources, I'd hit probates Monday through Friday, hitting the phones, right? And then I'd stack in open houses, right? So that would be my two strategies for my immediate. And with probate, 50% of all residential real estate that's owned in the United States is owned by boomers in the silent generation. So we're talking 75 million housing units. Just how math works, dude. 40% of those will not be here in 10 years. Over the next several decades, they'll all be gone. So we're talking, and 70% of families that inherit those estates bring them to market. So we're talking 52 million listing opportunities over the next several decades. It's going to be a wave like we haven't seen before. So I'd be hitting probates to get my listings. So then I always have my storefronts, right? I would want to master that niche. If there's one listing niche I think anybody should master right now, it's probates, right? Then I'd be stacking my open houses for that immediate now business. Cause dude, like if I'm new, I need to start making income right away. I don't want to do this BS where it takes me a year to make a deal. I'm like, I want income coming in within 60 to 90 days. Open house is the quickest way I've found for now immediate business. But then I would stack in my social media strategy, to go out there and when social media strategy is like there's a bazillion different strategies you can do with social media. But I'd be stacking in, my social media strategy that I personally would do organically, not paid ads. So then eventually, with at least with the open houses, could get to the point where in about a year or two, I'm not having to do those anymore. Now I got more inbound organic business coming in. I look at open houses, like I'm a huge fan. I know you are too. It was kind of what launched your career too. But I always look at that stuff as a means to an end. I don't know anybody that's like, oh, for the next 20 years of my life, I want to be just slaying open houses every day. I mean, some people do.
Yeah.
I enjoy them. I like them. Yeah, right. But I don't want to do them for a decade or two. Like to me, it's like that. That's like a 1 to 2 year stepping stone till I can get the inbound stuff coming in. Yeah, right. And then now, I can drop the prospecting stuff and then just keep scaling the hell out of the inbound stuff. And then as far as schedule, so this is the schedule I put everybody on that wants to get to a point, where they want to be closing at least a transaction a week. This is the schedule I followed through my whole entire journey being in production. So I'd start my workday at 7 a.m., 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. would be responding to any urgent messages that came in the night before, updating my CRM with any leads that came in the night before, and then prepping for my daily follow-up time, or prospecting time. Then 8 to 10 a.m., boom, I'm on the phones. That's when I'd be following my open house leads, prospecting my absentee owners. Then from there, 10 to 10:30 would be my sphere of influence, past clients, follow up there, and then 10:30 to noon would be my essential non-money making activity. That's my admin, right? Nurturing the business, start to have client updates, all of that stuff, right? And then noon on is what I call pounding the pavement time. That's listing presentations, buyer presentations, showing properties. If I don't have one of those three things going on, then I'm working on systems, processes, or skill set, or more prospecting.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, one of the things I think that we don't talk about enough in the industry, because a lot of times people get into real estate and they think that, they're going to show a few houses and make a bunch of money, but one of the things we don't really talk about is the time investment. And you kind of alluded to it with open houses, like no one wants to do open houses for the rest of their career, but you have to put that work in at the beginning because then eventually it'll kind of start snowballing, build up your lead database, and then eventually you can start cutting back and then focus on other things that are a little bit more time efficient and things of that nature. So I definitely think that's something that we as an industry don't really talk about is how much time it takes to actually build up your business and how much effort. But then if you do it the right way and put the time in, eventually you can start, being a little more efficient, scaling it back and things of that nature. So, now one thing I do want to talk about, and I'd be doing a service to everyone if I didn't talk about. So, about a year ago, obviously you made a big move over to EXP. We're now obviously business partners at EXP. I moved over with you as well too. One of the reasons why I want to have this conversation with you in particular is because from knowing you for last 8-9 years, I know you put a lot of thought into moving over to EXP. I know this wasn't like an overnight decision. A lot of times when people change brokerages, sometimes it's like, within a week, 2 weeks, okay, I'm going to make a move. But you didn't just make a move overnight. You were thinking about making a move or making a change, and you researched a lot of different brokerages, a lot of different methods, a lot of different opportunities. What made you decide to make the jump to EXP versus some of the other, companies that you were like researching and all that good? I think you even talked about like opening your own brokerage at one point, as well too, and then you ended up deciding to make the move over to EXP. So what brought that about, and what made you decide to make that transition?
Yeah, great question, dude. So, now first off, because I'll get some people that will reach out to me that have known me for a long time, like, oh man, I was shocked when I heard you join EXP. I'm like, nobody's more shocked than me. I think I talk more crap about this company than any other human being alive. But the reality is, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. Operating ego, emotion when it's a competitor. I just didn't get it. Yeah, right. Or at least for the first 5 years, right? The first 5 years of me having awareness of EXP, honestly, just it's like, dude, this I just thought it was a joke. I didn't see how they're going to sustain. But then the last 5 years, I knew it was legit. Yeah, right. Seeing all my team leader friends that were going over there crushing it. Seeing those that were focusing on rev share. Like seeing their direct deposits in their bank account because I didn't believe some of the numbers that they were telling me. So I was like, dude, I want to see proof. So I knew it worked, but then I had so much ego and emotion, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm going to go do my own thing. Because yeah, I mean, I had running my own team for a long time, but then before I joined EXP, I was a partner with a nationwide franchising firm, right? So we'd go. So our job was to go help brokerages launch we'd sell them a franchise, help them launch their brokerage, and then be successful broker owners. And I was involved in that company for about 5 years, and as a minority partner in that. And the thought was, okay, I'm just going to launch my own brokerage, and that was the journey, right? That was going to be our mission was to go out there and get 2,000 locations throughout the country, build a massive valuation, sell it, have a good payday, but then the industry changed, and just like in the residential business, like we were talking about earlier, like you gotta know how to read markets. I just started looking at the landscape, dude, right? So when you look at, okay, like the lawsuit era that we are in. So everybody's aware of the NAR class action lawsuit settlements that took place last year. Well, now the buy side lawsuits are starting up, right? Then as soon as these are done, these will probably be, I don't know if they'll be the same size as the seller class action lawsuit, but you're already having the biggest brokerages, out there doing big settlements for 40, 50 million, right, to get ahead of it. And then once this is done, they're going to do the RESPA lawsuits, coming after RESPA on realtors, team leaders, broker owners heavily in our industry. You get, the Zillow, class action. There's just so many going on. But then as soon as the RESPA one's done, okay, the NAR one, the seller class action lawsuit, that's only good for 5 years. The DOJ has been very public that they do not like this. They're going to reopen it up. Right. They want true commission decoupling. So I'm looking at, okay, all of this going on. I'm like, well, dude, like, do I want to take on the risk and the exposure? And can I? Right. Like I had friends that got hit with 10, 15, $20 million lawsuit settlements, for nothing they did wrong, nothing their agents did wrong, just because these class action lawsuits, and there was no getting out of it. There's no filing, restructuring through bankruptcy. Like there's no getting out of it. So then I was okay, looking at that landscape, and I'm like, number one, do I want to deal with this? Number two, can we afford to deal with this? Right? A lot of brokerages, had to fold out and fold in, and just lost everything overnight from that. But then too, with where just everything's going, dude, right? Like, all the mergers, acquisitions, with AI, I just had to be honest with myself of like, all right, dude, like, can I compete? Can we compete? Or does it make more sense for me to plug into a model where I can still build a brokerage inside of another somebody else's platform where I have no risk, no liability, no headaches. I'm running 100% pure margins, let them deal with all that BS. So I started going down that journey of just looking at, okay, how can I still do what I love doing? Like I do, I love coaching, training agents, helping agents grow their businesses. And, it's my obsession of life, dude. It's my love, but then looking at, okay, how can I do this under somebody else's umbrella in a way where it's a win-win? So then I just started exploring all the options, spent months, well, I mean, probably close to about a year, exploring all the options. And then it became very evident and obvious to me that EXP was the best platform, right? 15 straight, they're the only publicly traded real estate company that have 15 straight quarters of profitability. They're the highest profitable on a cash over, month over month cash basis. They got tons, good solid money in the bank, 100% debt free. So I just started assessing this of looking, okay, like, what are the financials? Like who can weather where we're headed into, but then also who can invest into AI and the things that we need to invest into to go out there and navigate this. Because I'm very certain in this saying, and again, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm just well, I should say extremely confident in this, that over the next 5 to 10 years, we're probably going to see about 4 to 5 major big companies in this industry, and that's it. And if we've seen this other industry, I mean, look at banking. There used to be like 5,000 plus banks throughout the United States. Now you got pretty much five, right? Railroads, there's 1,500 railroads at the peak in the 1800s. Now there's like seven, right? So, I mean, this is not just, I mean, this happens with all industry on a long enough time period. But I had to pick, okay, like what's going to be, I got to place my bet, dude. Like what's going to be the winning team. But then too, it wasn't just who was in the best financial perspective, but who could allow me to build what I want to build. Because one of the things that I got tired of in this industry is it's like, even when you build a team, yeah, it's all great, but it's like the second you stop, it stops. You're this hamster on this damn wheel, or like you're on the treadmill, but you can't get off the damn treadmill. And it's like, dude, I don't. For a time, it was fun, dude. Right? Like it was the rush and restarting over every single month. But then, dude, after you get in this business, you're in this business for a decade, 2 decades. It gets tiresome, right? And it doesn't mean that I don't want to work. I love working. I just don't like have to restart over every single month. So, one of the things at EXP that I love is 73% of EXP, because we're a publicly traded company in NASDAQ, is owned by us agents. So we get stock options to build, future wealth for that retirement, and then because of rev share, it allows us to build a real estate business inside of or a brokerage inside of a brokerage where now I can go out there and again, build up my agent count, have that mailbox money, that residual money coming in, and it works, dude, right? Like my first 5 months I was doing, or no, my first 7 months, I did the math. I got to redo it again, but I did the math, my 7 months in this, because the reason why I say I got to redo it is it's grown since, but I was just curious about 7 months in. I was like, dude, how much money would it take me to invest in the stock market to pay me the same residual income I'm making now? And dude, it was $5 million free and clear that I had to invest in the stock market, free and clear real estate to pay me the same residual income that I'm getting off rev share, at EXP. Um, I mean, it's just like, dude, I've never found a better vehicle, right? It's like, that didn't cost me any money. Just, Zoom account. And yeah, I worked my ass off, but I don't know any other place that you can go build up $5 million of wealth. It's not like I have that liquid, but you know what I'm saying? And then too, looking at, okay, for me to achieve my goals, I got to be with the best environment for agents to achieve their goals. So, the 2,500 support staff, all of the systems, the tools, I mean, and I've also, I'm kind of going on here, so I'll try to wrap this up for you. But, I've also done everything I always can to be with around the best. Yeah, right. And it's like, dude, like when you look at EXP, like, dude, they dominate, dude. It's where the best individual agents, best, team leaders are at, throughout the globe. Definitely, at least here in the United States, for sure. Nobody sells more real estate. It's where the pros go to grow. When you look at our average agent production, right, it's 3 times higher than the industry average. So it's just, so even from, being able to support our agents, because most don't want to come and do what I'm doing, like build a brokerage out of a brokerage. Most are joining XP because they want to become top producers. And yeah, they want to take advantage of the stock and other things, but they're really focused on production. What's the best environment that exists for that? Yeah, right. Or if you're looking to do what I do, it's the best environment that exists for that. So what I found with EXP, after all this due diligence, I'm like, dude, this is the best overall platform to be able to build any size of real estate business that you want to build, regardless of how big you want to grow it, dude. And it's even with my own real estate companies, like I always liked them. I would have said I loved them, but I was never like truly in love with them. And I didn't know that till I came to EXP. Like this is the first company I've been truly madly in love with. Even more so than my own companies. Right? Like, I mean, it is. I feel like I feel like I got the cure to cancer,
Mm.
and I try to share it with people, but they don't always take it, and it can be frustrating. But
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Most people, especially when it comes to revenue share, most people don't typically think about their retirement plans. They're always just thinking about like the now business, but it's like, well, what are you going to do when you can't produce anymore? You want to get out of this industry. So what is, out of curiosity, and I don't know if you have one or not, but what is the biggest thing? Obviously, you've been with EXP for about a year now. What's the biggest thing that you would say surprised you about moving? I mean, obviously you did a bunch of due diligence, but I'm sure there's got to be at least one thing that like really surprised you when you moved over. You're like, oh, I didn't realize, I wasn't expecting that.
yeah. I mean, the first thing was the support because that was the immediate thing. Like I've been in the business for a lot of years. I've been with good brokerages previously, right? So it wasn't like I was unhappy where I was at. I was really happy, but there's a difference between being happy and then also being with the right brokerage that allows you to truly build wealth for you and your family and becomes a life changer. But the first thing I witnessed, because I remember, talking with Ashley about a week in to this, I'm like, dude, like I was just so blown away by the support.
Mhm.
World class. When you have 2,500 people that are full time to be able to support us, like I've never had to wait more than 60 seconds to get support and help I need on anything. So that was the first thing that blew my mind. Then from there with the stock, like when I was looking at, like when I first joined, I didn't really care about the stock. I mean, I did. I looked at it as like icing on the cake. I'm like, dude, nobody's ever given me anything for free. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But then when I came over, like seeing the stock that people built up in this company, I won't name drop him because I don't have permission to do so. I don't know if he wants me to, but I met a guy once I joined EXP, that now he was like one of the OGs, so I'm not going to say this is going to be everybody's results. And he was here, so he joined like in 2009 when EXP first started and got in when stock was low. But this dude retired 2 years ago, cashed out of stock for $100 million.
Jeez.
So I'm like, dude, there's been, several people that have hit nine figures in stock from like free stock that they've been given from this company. A lot of eight figures, a lot of seven figures, right? So then when I started, seeing that, I'm like, well, maybe, this is going to be more than just, nice to have icing on the cake. I'm like, how can I gamify this and really maximize this? And again, I'm not naive thinking, oh, I'm going to make $100 million stock, but I'm like, okay, dude, like, yeah, I've been in the industry a long time, but I got in at 23 years old. So, I still like I'm going to do this till God takes away my ability to not. So I probably still have, another 30, however many years. I'm like, it's definitely going to build to substantial. I'm making about $2,000 a month in stock for free. That's just given to me. Like that's going to compound over time to whatever it's going to compound to. And then the other thing that, has been, I don't want to say a surprise because I was kind of expecting this, but definitely didn't let me down by any means, is the mastermind opportunities. I just had on my podcast the number one individual agent in the world for EXP, like single agent does like $101 million a year in sales volume. That's what he did last year. And I asked him that same question that you just asked me. And I'm like, dude, like, what's your favorite part? And he's like, dude, like, he's like the camaraderie, the culture, feeling like you're part of a family, right? The networking, all the relationships. And I said to him, I'm like, isn't that interesting? Like, with a cloud-based virtual company, so you think it'd be the opposite, but the networking, the masterminding, the relationships end up being deeper here because all my other brokers I was ever with were brick and mortar, local brick and mortar. Right. So like whether they're with our organization or not, it's like, dude, like everybody's been willing to, open up their playbook, share anything with you, spend time with, right. That's been awesome. The last thing that I'll say is just the amount that they're always adding.
Mm.
Right. It's like, dude, it's like, dude, like every week we get announced something new, something, that so just their obsession to make sure that we're ahead of the curve, that we have all the tools, resources that we need to navigate, the current market that we're in to make sure that we're supported at the highest level, and I think one of the reasons that differentiates us from other companies is even when you look at the C-suite team, because when you're a multi-billion-dollar global company, like this is ran like a Fortune 500 company, right? Not saying we're Fortune 500, but you know, but when you look at from the CEO to the CMO to everybody down, it's like they like a mandate is they all had to have extensive real estate experience they got to be qualified for that job too. But like our CEO, he was the number one team leader in the world for many, many years. Right? So when they're making decisions as a company, because they all like even our chief marketing officer, Wendy Forsythe. I mean, she individual agent, she was doing like 100 units a year.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. So when they're making strategic decisions of direction of the company, tools to add, things to add, like they've all been in our shoes. They know if it's truly going to be something of value. They know our pain points. They know our fears, our stresses. So I think that that's what allows them to make such good strategic decisions with, the support systems, tools that they're always adding and providing to us.
Yeah, yeah, I felt the same way, especially with the community. Like I was super surprised when we moved over to EXP in the community that it's from coming from a brick and mortar location. How much of a community experience or feel that you typically have. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about something that I felt like you touched on, which is very important too, as far as leveraging or partnering with people who have a very high standard and are very successful themselves in this industry. Because a lot of times that's something agents don't realize the value of being associated with people who perform at a very high level, because typically what they do is they motivate them, they push them, they bring them along, and that's obviously when I first got into real estate. I mean, obviously, I first joined your team, when I first got into real estate, and when you moved over to XP, that's one of the reasons, why I ended up moving over to EXP too, is because, with, our previous brokerage, I didn't have the same type of association with people who've done it at a high level. So now we obviously are business partners with yourself, Mike Sherrard, Armando Nalica Gomez. Like, there's so much value that not only are we able to provide to our agents, but we're able to get ourselves as well too. So I mention that because if for some reason anyone's watching this podcast and they want to look at what that partnership may look like as well too, what type of value we provide to our agents, and want to look at what partnering with me, Josh, Mike, Armando, Nalika, looks like, I'm gonna go ahead and put my Zoom link or my calendar link below. Go ahead and schedule a Zoom meeting with me. Have a conversation. Again, since we're all business partners, that's the great thing about EXP is you have so many levels of that partnership, that you're able to get access to, all for free just for joining EXP's organization. So I'll put all my contact information below. But Josh, do you have any kind of final words for anyone that's watching this? Just about kind of the future market or things that agents should really be focusing on right now in order to really crush it in 2026.
Yeah, I got two things. So first, just based on what you were talking about, my wife gets sick of me saying this, but I tell her every day, sometimes multiple times a day, that man, I wished I would have been open-minded enough to really sit down and learn about this opportunity 10 years ago. Because if I would have joined 10 years ago, my life would look so much different than it does today. Best time to plant a tree 10 years ago, second best time today. So my encouragement is to be open-minded enough to jump on a call with Scott to just learn about the opportunity. I'm not saying to join. Scott isn't going to try to beg you or push you or hard sell you. Just learn what we got going on. If you think it's a better fit to help you accomplish your real estate goals, great. If not, that's okay too. But I'd really encourage you just to be open-minded enough to explore the opportunity, because the most expensive thing that any of us can own is a closed mind, right? And with this, now I'll you could take this with a grain of salt, but I'm telling you guys, everybody that's watching, listen to this right now, like nobody has better systems, tools, coaching, mentorship. Like we were really strategic with this, so when you get full access to Scott, all his resources, one of the top team leaders in the country, access to Armando Nalica, which we're one commonality that we have. We've all built extremely successful businesses, but we all have different skill sets. So I got Scott's skill sets, Armando Nalica's skill sets, my skill sets, Mike Sherrard, who's the best in the world at AI and social media. Like it creates that complete coaching support package that doesn't exist anywhere in the world that I've ever found. So, highly would encourage that. Then as far as, just ending words for, entering 2026, look, you guys, like there's times of peace, there's times of war. 2012 through 2022, decade of peace in business, right? So longest bull market in recorded history, longest real estate expansion in recorded history, longest economic expansion in recorded history. Now we're in time of war. Now it's contraction time. It's entering recession time. We're definitely in a real estate recession right now with transaction volume, decline. So now it's time of war. Time of war, man. Like you got to work your ass off. You got to be focused. You got to be more focused, more intentional. Yeah, you're gonna have to work harder, but just understand that this too shall pass. We're still in the best vehicle that exists out there. There's massive opportunity. There's going to become more opportunities to come. So just understand like that. Yeah, it's going to be hard. We're all going to experience it. We're all experiencing it now. We're going to continue to experience it. This is going to be a quick fix. But I can promise you this, that if you push through this, the growth that you'll experience, like you will not regret it. So just understand this too shall pass. You will get through it. We're in the best vehicle that exists out there. And I have agents that reach out to me like, oh, I'm thinking about joining the corporate world, getting a job. I'm like, that's about the most vulnerable thing that you could possibly do right now. Like Amazon's laying off 3,000 people, Microsoft's laying off 15, like, dude, like, especially in 2026 or 2026, that's going to be the year of mass layoffs. They're at least the beginning phase of these. And think about AI, like Amazon's announced that by 2030, they plan on letting go of 600,000 workers, because of, right? So it's like, this is the least risk averse place that you possibly can be in our industry. So you're in the right spot. Now you just got to commit to it. Hey, I'm going to go out there and do what it takes, to make amazing opportunities for myself and my family, and you won't regret it.
Nice, nice. Awesome. Well, again, Josh, I appreciate hopping on this podcast. Hopefully our viewers took some definite lessons of what they should be doing in 2026. So Josh, again, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it was an honor.
Okay, awesome. Bye, guys.